Vaccines for COVID-19 were developed, tested, and rolled out in record time. Last week, the United States surprised many when it announced support for a temporary waiver on patents protecting the intellectual property of those vaccines. Will that make it happen? Should it happen? Let's consider that with, in our nation's capital, Jason Nickerson, Humanitarian Affairs Advisor for Doctors Without Borders and an adjunct professor of common law at the University of Ottawa's Centre for Health Law, Policy and Ethics. And in Waterloo, Ontario, economist Rohinton Medhora, president of CIGI, the Centre for International Governance Innovation. And it's good to have you two back on our airwaves tonight. We want to just get some background on the record to start out with, and this is a rather officious sounding release from the World Trade Organization, but let's put it on the record anyway. And Tony, if you wouldn't mind bringing this up, I'll read along. The WTO Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights, TRIPS for short, is the most comprehensive multilateral agreement on intellectual property, IP. It plays a central role in facilitating trade in knowledge and creativity, in resolving trade disputes over IP, and in assuring World Trade Organization members the latitude to achieve their domestic policy objectives. It frames the IP system in terms of innovation, technology transfer, and public welfare. The agreement is a legal recognition of the significance of links between IP and trade and the need for a balanced IP system. And let's follow up on that as well by sharing this graph from the Duke Global Health Innovation Center, which shows COVID-19 vaccine doses purchased by country income level. And it will probably surprise nobody that the higher income countries account for more than half of COVID-19 purchases, and upper middle income are at 17%. COVAX, that's that deal organized by many of the well-off countries in China, 18%, and lower middle income countries really do come at the bottom of the food chain there with only 11% together. Jason, let's get into this now. What exactly does this waiver allow countries to do?
Sure. So the waiver is exactly that. It's a request from two countries that was tabled towards the end of last year. I believe it was in October of 2020, that requested a waiver from certain rules contained within the TRIPS agreement. So essentially, what it says is that given the circumstances of the global pandemic, this is an unprecedented emergency where the world is facing a massive gap in the available supply of COVID-19 technologies, including vaccines, but also therapeutics, diagnostic tests, and other medical devices. We know that we need to scale up the manufacturing and the distribution of all of these things. And it's simply a recognition that intellectual property rights have in the past been a barrier, in particular for access to medicines. And it's a request from two countries, India and South Africa, that given these circumstances, countries could choose to waive certain requirements of the TRIPS agreement in order to facilitate the more widespread manufacturing of essential medicines, vaccines, diagnostic tests, and so on. So it's really just a recognition that intellectual property rights are essentially there to grant a monopoly to rights holders. And in instances where those monopolies and those rights might be a barrier, countries can simply choose to not enforce them.
Okay, and a brief follow-up here. It is a temporary waiver. Do we have any sense of how long it is meant to last?
Well, the language that's being discussed is that this would be for the duration of the pandemic, which I think is actually quite a reasonable thing to propose. And in many ways, that pushes back on some of the counter arguments, from opponents saying that this is going to completely disrupt the intellectual property regime, when in reality, this is a solution that's being proposed for the duration of the pandemic, given the exceptional circumstances that are presented for all of us today.
Okay, Rohinton, let me get you in here. As Jason just said, the waiver was first proposed by two countries, India and South Africa. That was last October. They were turned down. So what has changed in the interim?
A number of things have changed, actually. First, even when South Africa and India made the proposal, they did have dozens of countries. Within weeks, they had 100 countries supporting them. But to be sure, they were not the countries that mattered in the WTO. Since then, what has changed is the realization that at the time that this happened, vaccines had not come on market. And so there was a certain optimism about the fact that once they came on, things would change rapidly. And as your very striking graphic at the outset showed, the advent of vaccines does not mean that everyone in the world has access to them. Meanwhile, we know from variants named UK, Brazil, South Africa, and India that variants keep mutating and happening and coming back to us. And so the realization that we needed widespread vaccination and that patents and IP was a necessary component of that arsenal is one thing that has changed. I'd say that the strong weight that civil society and world leaders have put behind the TRIPS waiver is a phenomenon one sees every few years and rapidly takes on a momentum of its own and makes a difference for policymakers. And finally, I'd argue that geopolitics has changed. One is the advent of the Biden administration. The Trump administration was absolutely opposed to the TRIPS waiver. The Biden administration wants to show that the US is back in different ways. They've re-signed to the Paris Accord. They have also agreed to something else that the US was opposing, which was a granting or the creation of the IMF's currency, the SDRs, to fight the pandemic. And so this is one more move, but it goes beyond symbolism. And so this is my final point. China. China and other countries have been using what's called vaccine diplomacy to their credit. The US has been frozen out of this by coming across as awfully nationalistic. This is a way for the US to show that it is actually doing something globally, changing its image, and at the same time dealing with what it considers its major foreign policy challenge, which is the growing rise of China as an influence.
I wonder, Rohinton, if I can do a quick follow-up with you and put maybe one more thing on that list that I don't think I heard, and that was, okay, again, the two countries, India and South Africa, asking for that waiver, they do have significant pharma capacity, I guess, in their two countries. Unlike Canada, they do have a significant budding pharma sector. And I wonder whether there was a concern that maybe their pitch sounded like that they were trying to disproportionately take advantage of something that was in their own lands. I don't know, you tell me.
You're absolutely right. There was the sense that this was self-serving. The way one official put it to me was this was peacocking on the part of the countries. On the other hand, note that there's a contradiction here, Steve. On the one hand, we're concerned that India and South Africa have the capability, after all, they have space programs too, to do this highly complex process. On the other hand, opponents of the TRIPS waiver, one of their major points is that this is so complicated. IP waiver is a sideshow. Most countries couldn't do it anyway. So we can't have it both ways. Either we're concerned about infant industries in other countries or we're not.
Understood. Okay, Jason, let me get you back in here. Okay, so we know America is prepared to play ball on this thing. Is that having a ripple effect now in other countries around the world?
Well, the short answer is yes. I think many of us were caught somewhat by surprise with the announcement last week that the U.S. Would support really quite a narrow interpretation of the waiver. So the U.S. language that was released last week is quite specific, that they are in support of a waiver for COVID-19 vaccines. And I think that it's important to unpack the fact that the conversation that we need to be having, and in fact the initial intent of the waiver, was not restricted to COVID-19 vaccines. It's actually a much broader conversation and a much broader waiver that needs to be in place to cover things like therapeutics, diagnostic tests, medical devices, and other things that we need to address the pandemic. But I think that as was mentioned before, we're having this conversation increasingly in public because of the U.S. announcement. And there were a number of other countries that released supportive statements shortly after the U.S. But prior to the U.S. announcement, this was a proposal that had support, as was mentioned, of roughly 100 different countries, of the World Health Organization, of many civil society organizations, Nobel Prize economists. This is a proposal that prior to the U.S. announcement had garnered significant support from a number of very credible actors. So yes, the U.S. announcement of a narrow support for a COVID-19 vaccine waiver is significant, but this had momentum long before then as well.
In which case, Rohinton, does this suggest that if it goes forward, supply is going to boom overnight, and that these countries that were having difficulty getting supply will almost immediately therefore get it?
Not at all. In fact, one of the other things that probably went wrong early on was the sense that this was a silver bullet, and that if only IP were freed up, supply would follow. We know for a fact that vaccine production is a highly complex process. There are about 280 steps in creating the mRNA vaccine, and then there's the question of transportation, storage, and logistics. So let's be clear that this is a daunting task. But a necessary first step is to have the IP available. We know that some countries might not be vaccinated until 23, 24. So we're not going to have global herd immunity for several years now. By the way, that's the way it was with smallpox eradication as well. It took 2 decades. If we're in it for the medium or long haul, then the fact that a TRIPS waiver wouldn't immediately unlock supply, I don't think is that concerning. So long as we have enough supply in the next 2 or 3 years, and there is capacity in many advanced developing countries, then I think we'd still be in a good space.
All right, Jason, if the TRIPS waiver is not going to increase vaccine availability in the immediate run to those countries that need it most urgently, what's the point?
Well, I think we need to come back to a few things. So the first is that the TRIPS waiver is not and should not be restricted to COVID-19 vaccines. So I agree, there are no magic bullet solutions here for COVID vaccines or really for any health technology. And I think that we need to be clear that that's not what anybody is suggesting. There are a number of steps ranging from removing intellectual property barriers through to technology transfer, scaling up of manufacturing supplies and fill and finish capacity and so on that goes into increasing the available supply of COVID vaccines. And all of those things need to be happening. We can't look at any one of these as being a magic bullet solution that is going to solve this supply-demand imbalance in isolation. We need a full suite of interventions to effectively increase manufacturing capacity around the world. And I think, there's a few things that flow from that. One is that this is not a conversation for COVID vaccines that should be restricted to just, how do we increase manufacturing capacity? That capacity is increasing, but what hasn't changed is where vaccines are being produced. So we also need a diversification of vaccine manufacturing capacity into different parts of the world to try and address some of these access constraints. But the TRIPS waiver, if we look outside of COVID vaccines, I think really has the potential to potentially accelerate the manufacturing of other COVID-19 technologies, in particular things like small molecule drugs that are easier to scale up by subsequent entrants or generics manufacturers. There are some expensive COVID-19 therapeutics that are already approved and that are in use, and there's more in the pipeline. So, this is the TRIPS waiver is one piece of a much broader puzzle, and it's unblocking one of the barriers on the road to access for COVID vaccines, but also for other health technologies as well. And we need to keep all of these things in mind as we're having this conversation.
Well, let me follow up on that with Rohinton, because I do want to make sure I understand this properly. Is the TRIPS waiver being sought for all sorts of vaccines or only COVID-19 vaccines? Because I hear Jason saying it ought to go beyond just COVID-19 vaccines. What's the case?
The TRIPS waiver is being sought only for COVID-19 vaccines. However, it is also being sought for COVID-19 therapeutics, and that's the beyond. But in terms of the TRIPS waiver, it is a limited time, limited subject area proposal. And you began by reading what TRIPS is about. It's about connecting innovation, technology, and public welfare. That balance, which TRIPS, I think, creates well, radically changes when you have a global crisis, such as COVID. In this case, it could be that public welfare considerations have to trump the other two. And so what the TRIPS waiver does is use that, in fact, power that TRIPS gives us to waive the way we enforce the agreement in a limited time frame so that we get over this crisis with its economic and social costs.
All right, that you just provoked another follow-up for me, and because you're an economist, Rohinton, I want to go back at you with this one. For those who oppose the waiver, and you can understand there are honorable people who do oppose the waiver because they're concerned about what might happen to economies in the countries where these drugs originate. They are concerned about negative impacts on companies. They are concerned about negative impacts on ability to innovate, all of that kind of stuff. Are those reasonable concerns in your view?
They are reasonable concerns, but there are also reasonable responses. To begin, vaccine development is not something that the private sector does on its own, taking on all the huge risks and therefore deservedly receiving all the huge profits. A lot of the development and subsidization of vaccine has come from governments, especially the US government, and philanthropy, notably the Gates Foundation. So the cost-benefit calculus is quite different in light of those investments that are public. Second, the International Chamber of Commerce released a study a few months ago, earlier this year actually, that found that the total cost to the global economy of not fighting the virus everywhere will be about $9.2 trillion. And this is going to be felt around the world, just as we in Canada continue to be in various versions of lockdown because of variants coming in and inadequate vaccination. So yes, there might be some losers, but I think that's overstating it. I belong to a group to which Nobel Prize winner Joe Stiglitz is also, in fact, he co-chairs it. We did some rough calculations on the public investments that have been made to vaccine development and the profits that the 2 or 3 main companies have already made from vaccine sales. And the fact is they have recouped their investments. There's also the possibility of boosters, which are going to be sold, we are told, at multiples of the cost of so-called pandemic pricing. You add all of that up, and what you find is that this is an industry that's hugely subsidized. Yes, there are some Canadian firms that are part of the value chain. Presumably, they've received their payment as well. And the costs to the rest of the economy and the world from not doing anything outweigh the few costs that might remain for the firms whose monopoly rents we're now seeking to access.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but let's get, well, we've got a quote here from Innovative Medicines Canada, so we'll get their position on the record here and see what they have to say. Tony, let's bring this up and we'll read along. It says, since it will not address the real issues afflicting vaccine supply and distribution, Innovative Medicines Canada does not support the proposed TRIPS IP waiver for COVID-19 vaccines at the WTO. The proposed waiver of TRIPS IP protections would be a disappointing step that will create greater uncertainty and unpredictability in the production, quality, and availability of COVID-19 vaccines worldwide. Okay, Jason, we do have to acknowledge this. Throughout this pandemic, innovation has proved to be critical. Individuals, enterprises, countries, they've all come together to create this potentially planet-saving vaccine in record time to combat this global virus. Do we not therefore have to be, do we not have to listen, at least, to what Innovative Medicines Canada and those who believe as they do about the potential pitfalls of offering this TRIPS loophole?
Well, I think that the point that you've just made and that my colleague has just made really underscores why the TRIPS waiver is all the more essential, right? We have vaccines today because of a tremendous amount of collaborative research and development, collaborative science, open science that has largely been de-risked and subsidized by governments, by the public. We do not have the COVID-19 vaccines that we have today because of monopolies. So to sort of arrive at the place where we have a portfolio of vaccines, of therapeutics that are in the pipeline, of diagnostic tests that are coming online and being made available, because of a truly global scientific endeavor that has largely been de-risked by significant government and public investment, is truly I would say a compelling reason for why we need a TRIPS waiver to remove basically an artificial barrier to scaling up the manufacturing of those same technologies. I'm not sure that there really, in my view, is not a compelling reason, given all of this collaboration and given all of this public investment, as to why we should enforce intellectual property rules that grant monopolies to private companies when we have such a massive gap in supply and demand, and such a frankly massive inequity in access to these technologies. The graph that you put up at the start really emphasizes that, but I think further emphasizing that is that of all of the COVID-19 vaccines that have been administered, it's less than 1% of those vaccines that have been given in low-income countries. This is inequity in action. It's playing out in front of all of us, and we need to do everything that we can to unblock the scaling up and diversification of manufacturing of vaccines.
I appreciate your position on this, and well, Rohinton, you'll appreciate I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here because we don't have anybody from the pharmaceutical industry on this program, but their view would be, we invest our time, we invest our money, we invest our expertise. We've built these drugs that have been extremely successful in taking on the worst pandemic in 100 years. We need to recoup our investment. And beyond that, we understand that governments want to squeeze every drop out of us that they can. But if they squeeze too tightly, there won't be any industry. And then where are we going to be? That's the argument. I mean,
that's the argument.
There is a bit of a leg there to stand on, isn't there?
Absolutely. And that's why we have TRIPS. And RMC, which is the spokesperson for the industry, makes the point well. Intellectual property, I don't think anyone should be questioning the need for competition, the need for the private sector to be central to all of this. But we do have what is really not a success of the private sector alone, but actually a shining success of private-public partnerships. Operation Warp Speed, the billions of dollars of grants made through the defense and space and other science granting programs in the US, in Europe, and elsewhere, that created the foundational research on which the mRNA vaccine is based, are all things that we as publics funded. The profits from the vaccine have indeed been recouped, and most of the investment, as Jason pointed out, has been de-risked. This is not about reopening the entire innovation debate. This is not about injecting uncertainty. If anything, I'd argue that a TRIPS waiver makes the playing field more level, makes it more certain, gives us a better chance of fighting what is going to be a tough 2 or 3 years around the world, and therefore makes economic conditions for investment more profitable, not less.
Okay, gentlemen, just finally and very briefly, how do we reach a pragmatic solution here which assures that developing countries get equal access to these important medications while at the same time we don't disincentivize research, development, and innovation? Rohinton, go ahead.
I'd say that these are not either or propositions, and that the more people we vaccine, the sooner we vaccine, the healthier the global economy and society would be, which is only a good thing for innovation. The other point I'd make is that this isn't just about COVID vaccines. It's a wider array of issues we have to deal with, including the opacity of contracts, the pricing of vaccines, their availability, on what terms and to who. So there's a package of issues which have to be dealt with jointly, which actually are both fairer and more efficient.
Jason, last word to you.
Completely agree. We cannot accept that there is a fatal imbalance of access to new medicines and new vaccines between people living in economically wealthy and economically poorer countries. This is a problem that we need to address as part of this pandemic. We need to invest in the scaling up and the diversification of manufacturing for COVID-19 technologies, and removing intellectual property barriers is part of that. I also agree that we do need a broader suite of interventions to more effectively prepare for responding to pathogens with pandemic potential. We see a massive underinvestment in a large variety of different diseases that have pandemic potential. They're essentially market failures, and that is a much broader issue that we need to tackle as a global community as well.
That, sadly, gentlemen, is our time, but you have laid out, I think, quite nicely the conundrum that governments are dealing with all over the world, which is a real on the one hand, on the other hand thing. On the one hand, we don't want to disincentivize research and innovation. On the other hand, we got a global pandemic and we got to take care of people right now. So thank you for having the debate on TVO with us tonight. We're grateful for your time.
Thanks so much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.